Hello and welcome to the third and final episode in the series of Road Freight Electrification. You are listening to the SFC Academy podcast, where we share interesting and important information and updates about freight decarbonization and the drive towards zero emissions logistics industry. I'm Andy Golding, and I'm your host for today. As I've said, we're talking about road freight electrification. This is episode 3 of our 3-part series. We're looking at the importance of road freight electrification, understanding it, the focus of Smart Freight Center when it comes to road freight electrification. And today we're going to focus on the role and importance of education in road freight electrification. As for the previous 2 episodes in this series, I'm joined by my colleague Tharsis Teoh. And so, without further ado, let's drive right into episode 3. Let's look at the role of and the importance of education in road freight electrification. Tharsis, awesome to have you back. As a kickoff for today, what problems does road freight electrification aim to solve in the logistics industry?
Right. So I think the big one that we're trying to solve is the impact or the contribution of carbon emissions to climate change. Road freight electrification could reduce all of that. As I mentioned in the first episode, 96% of the energy used in the road freight sector comes from fossil fuels, which is not a good thing. But if we rely or reuse electric freight vehicles instead, the potential for emissions reduction is up to 85% in countries with a low carbon electricity grid. And so as we phase out the use of internal combustion engine vehicles and fossil fuels, I think we're going closer to dealing with the challenge of climate change.
We talk about road freight electrification. We've spoken a lot about the importance of it. You've just mentioned the 96%. We know that fleet electrification can deliver up to 85% GHG emissions reductions. But we've also spoken, and we spoke a lot about this in episode 2, about how it's a beast, completely overhauling the traditional trucking industry. We spoke in that episode a lot about the need for governments, policies, stakeholders, manufacturers, all to come together to make this work and to make this viable. Spoke about some of the complexity of charging infrastructure. And with all of that in mind, we've just released our introduction to road freight electrification training at Smart Freight Center. If you're interested in checking it out, go to academy.smartfreightcenter.org and look for our intro to road freight electrification. But Tharsis, why did we create this training?
We created this training because we realized that the challenge with this transition is not just a technology transition. It's not just replacing your diesel truck with an electric truck. It's really a socio-technical transition. It's about changing the practices and the expectations of all the different stakeholders in the system. They need to understand that this transition is bigger and can be more complex. It can be disruptive, and there could be a lot of things that are unexpected that could happen. And so we wanted to address some of the things that we've understood so far about the transition that could put fleet operators, shippers, carriers, anyone in the logistics sector a bit closer to understanding the transition that's happening. And the training is, we've created at this point really an introductory course. And it introduces key concepts to road freight electrification that gives stakeholders the language to have continued discussions about this. So we know that the knowledge is growing, the knowledge is about the transitions increasing. We want to make sure that everyone is speaking, everyone has the same vocabulary about this transition. And that will enable us to address the disruption a bit better. And hopefully we'll all still be friends after this transition happens.
I think we'll be more than friends. And I say that in the... That's probably not... Oh, no. All right. That was not appropriate at all. Um, really glad that we got that on camera. Pulling myself towards myself after that. I would definitely think that if we get this right, especially with the work that we're doing with the Fleet Electrification Coalition, all of the work that Smart Freight Center is doing to bring the multiple stakeholders and the multiple facets of this conversation together and to try and move everything along together, I would certainly hope that everybody is still friends at the end of this process. And because there's a common benefit for everyone. It's really one of those things where it's very clear, even as a layman, which I am in this context, to see what the long-term benefits of all of this change would be. But as you say, it's massive upheaval, it's massive change. Change is always uncomfortable, though. Change is, if change wasn't uncomfortable, we wouldn't shy away from it as human beings. But it's important. And I think with the bigger picture in mind, it's critical that we start to move towards this. I know that in our training, we look at the different perspectives, and you've also briefly mentioned that we look at the perspectives of carriers and of shippers. And maybe you can say a little bit more about why we look at the perspectives of different players in our introductory training.
Right. So maybe to start that, I have a little joke.
I love a good Tharsis joke.
This is not going to go well. Anyway, let's go. So the chicken crossing the road joke. That's the same category. Why did the electric truck cross the road?
Because that's where the charging station was. Why did the electric truck cross the road, Tharsis?
Because the freight buyer wanted it to. Never mind.
Oh, no, wait, no, never mind. We're just going to let that one sit for a moment. We're going to give it its moment of airtime. It deserves it. Because the freight buyer wanted it to, and the crowd goes wild. Tharsis, please say more.
Yeah, no, right. So, we understand that there is this particular relationship between freight buyers and transport service providers. And typically we understand that most of the time, a transport service provider will only provide a service if they're going to be paid for it, if there's a business model behind it, if they can, continue running their operations and their business and be profitable. So we're addressing two different perspectives in our training. One is the freight buyer and one is the carrier. The carrier is the direct stakeholder, let's say, or the direct actor in road freight electrification. They're the ones who have to buy the truck, understand how to operate it, make sure they have a charging infrastructure strategy, and be the ones understanding how to operate and be the ones having to deal with the challenges of the transition. They're the direct stakeholders in this process. But freight buyers are the ones that are, could be a strong support in this entire transition. They're the ones who want the service. So for the most part, they're the ones who are driving sustainability in logistics. We see that in the members and SFC, and we know that they have different programs to reduce their emissions in different parts of their supply chain, for example, or in electricity use, or in their different parts of their manufacturing and agriculture and so on. And it's the same in logistics. They are the ones who are driving the sustainability in logistics. And so we're addressing the fact that both of these parties do need to play a role and collaborate and support each other in this particular transition.
And I think it's really valuable from the learner's perspective to understand what the view and the role of these different parties is in this transition. And I think that it's a somewhat, if you take away all of the technicalities, it's a typical situation of the market is signaling demand. The market is demanding changes. But then also there's all of the background work being done with the Fleet Electrification Coalition and all of the other work that SFC is doing to help get shippers and organizations on board working together, working towards common goals. You've got governments coming to the party, manufacturers, and so it's we said we were speaking in episode 2 about a lot of underground work that's been done, or work that was kind of not obvious, maybe, that's been done to get us to this point. And it's almost feeling through this conversation that we're reaching a kind of tipping point where road freight electrification becomes a lot, and I'm going to say this in big air quotes, but a lot easier than it would ever have been before, because there's all of these critical puzzle pieces like access to financing, policy, charging infrastructure that seem to finally be fitting together, or at least getting very close to fitting together. Would you say that that's a correct assessment?
Yes, I would say to the most part, we see a shift. We know that we're close to a tipping point, but at the same time, we also recognize that there are a few big barriers that we do need to address. That, once those are addressed, and they're addressed in a good way, we'll see the tipping point. And we'll see the industry move a lot quicker and faster into this. And I mean, one thing I wanted to add to what I previously mentioned was one of the reasons why we provide this training is we want to show carriers and freight buyers how to work together. So it's not, I mean, a freight buyer, if they wanted to, they could, demand a lot of services from the carrier and say, we want an electric road freight service. But that will only work if the supply side or the road freight services market is sufficiently mature to provide that. And in this transition stage, that's not the case at this point. So in this transition stage, we need to make sure that the freight buyer and the carrier know how to work well with each other. The freight buyer knows how to support. The carrier knows how to convey the challenges to the freight buyer. And I think when that, the communication part, the coordination part is, once that gets better, we'll also see a huge change in the relationships and the learning that needs to happen in the sector.
That makes a lot of sense. It's everybody's got to work together, and certain things need to happen and need to fall into place to make this whole transition easier and more feasible. And it's new, it's a lot, but it's also very exciting to see all of the work that's being done, all of the commitment from the sector. Our own Fleet Electrification Coalition, we have over 50 shippers and fleet owners who have come together. The objective of the Fleet Electrification Coalition being to enable 30% zero-emission truck sales by 2030 and 100% by 2040 globally. These are, some might say, big, hairy, audacious goals, BHAGs, but they're important, and they fall right in line with Smart Freight Center's goals and missions of driving the logistics industry to zero emissions by 2050. And I think it's quite clear that companies know that change needs to be made. They're oftentimes now more than ever willing to make change, but without access to education, without access to capacity building, it's really hard for them to make those changes. And that's why I'm really excited about this introduction to road freight electrification training that we have, but also the ongoing webinars, Q&As, get-together sessions that we'll be having on road freight electrification because Tharsis, I think something that's important for us to share is that it's a moving target. It's a developing story. It's a evolving subject. I'm not sure if you have anything more you want to add on that.
Yeah, I think it's really early days. I mean, one thing to note is, in addition to the e-training, We will also be trying to organize quarterly Q&A sessions to address a lot of the questions that we didn't address perhaps in the training directly, and direct the learners towards resources that are available already online. And the other thing that we want to do is to continue the conversation, with the work that we're doing in the Fleet Electrification Coalition, the different work streams, talking about vehicle affordability or charging infrastructure or finance. We want to make sure that our learners are continually updated to the extent that they are ready for it in a way that makes sense for them. Now, we know that it's a lot of time commitment, but we think that coming together, airing out the questions, concerns, complaints, even together in a community will help sort of the practice move forward. Because we're not so concerned with information. Information you can get anywhere. The internet is full of reports and publications and handbooks and guides on how to do something. But coming together and speaking and sharing experiences and problem solving together is what will push the industry forward.
I 100% agree with you. I think some of the best learning happens when we're learning from each other and with each other. And so those Q&A sessions, that community building essentially is going to really help accelerate everybody forward on this. That wraps us up for episode 3 of our podcast series on road freight electrification. Tharsis, it has been a pleasure. We have some amazing background bloopers from this recording. Thank you for making this fun. Thank you for sharing your insights, your time, and thanks for being my guest on the Smart Freight Center Academy podcast.
My pleasure, Andy.
Cool. Thanks for listening.